We've just emptied the compost that was here at the end of my composting area, and we've put the finished compost over on some of the beds right now. And then Josie came along and started digging, and she's helped to create a really nice tilth in here. But basically what I have now is a big empty space, and it's perfect for using to make even more compost. You can make compost at any time of the year, but I've been collecting grass clippings and garden waste and brown cardboard boxes and bits of branches, things like that. And I have quite a lot. And when you build a compost pile all at once, it generates so much more heat and bacterial action, and it breaks down so much more quickly. So I'm going to show you today how I build an entire compost pile, and then you can go on to make it as well. It is now September, so there's all different types of things like fallen leaves and things from your garden that you've been harvesting, and you can pile it up and you'll have compost perhaps in a few months, but definitely by next spring. This is my composting area. It sits at the bottom of my vegetable garden, and we made it using wood pallets. You can see how they're all put together to create 3 separate bays. And at the front of them, the doors are just these simple wooden slats that you can take out and put back in, which are very handy for if you want to access compost or to keep it contained. The reason that there are 3 bays here is that it just makes the composting system so much easier. The first bay, which is over here on the end, this is where you put your fresh material, or what I do in the summer. And as I have it, I just stack it inside. This is called cold composting, and you can just throw in anything as you have it. It dries and breaks down a lot more slowly. It takes about a year to make compost this way. But at the end of the season, what I'll do is I'll turn the compost over into the next bay, and that exposes the more finished compost that's at the bottom there, puts it on top and helps it to all break down. And then it gets turned into the last one, and that's where the finished compost is, and then that can go out onto the garden. The composting area is made out of wood pallets, which some people might not mind the look of, but this structure is at the bottom of our garden. It's also the very first thing that you see when you drive up our driveway, and so I wanted to disguise it in a way that was functional but also somewhat attractive, and that's why we built a dead hedge right around it. I have an entire video that shows exactly how we built all of this, including putting the pallets together, making those slatted fronts, and then of course building the dead hedge. And I really love how it looks. It creates habitat. The wood will break down over time. I can top it up with even more garden waste, and it really disguises those pallets. There are so many ways to make compost that it can be really intimidating. But the basic idea is that anything that has once been living will break down naturally and become compost. So plants, even animals, hair, nail clippings, anything that is of organic origin will break down eventually. Sometimes it takes a long time for it to break down, or it breaks down in a very sludgy manner, but it will break down. When we compost in our gardens, we control that action. So we use a good ratio of browns and greens, which are carbon-rich materials and nitrogen-rich materials, to speed things up and to make sure that that happens in a really homogeneous way. But saying that, throughout the year, I throw whatever I find in the garden that is dead material, weeds, whatever, into one bin. It's a slow composting method. It takes about a year for you to have finished compost that way, but it is an easy way. It's quite a lazy way, and it's a way that I use for most things. But when you have a lot of materials around, like I do right now, I've got this marshmallow that blew down in the wind. I've got tons of cardboard that I've been saving up. I have weeds and lawn clippings and so many other things. Now I've got so much material that I can actually build a proper pile, and when you're doing that, you have to pay attention more so to the ratios. Otherwise, you get it wrong and either the compost won't actually do anything, it'll be very slow if you have too many browns, for example, or if you have too many greens, it can become quite sludgy and gross and icky and smell, and we're not going for that either. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my collection of materials and I'm going to layer them behind me in this compost bay in about a 50-50% ratio of browns and greens. You don't have to measure by weight or anything, it's just eyeballing the ratios. And so a 50-50 ratio, or even better, 75% brown materials to 25% green, perfect. But don't overthink it. A good mix, lots of different materials and small materials as well. So I've spent a good amount of time ripping up this cardboard into small pieces, and this is going to break down much quicker than large sheets. Things like this marshmallow, which is in long stems, I'm going to first chop it into smaller, more manageable pieces like this before I put it in the pile. That helps it to break down more easily as well. Layering your browns and greens is really easy. Just eyeball it and add a little bit of this, a little bit of that, never piling on too much of any type of material at once. And if you want the pile to heat up and compost quicker, keep layering until the pile is at least 1 cubic meter in size. That's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. I've made a pile that comes about halfway up this area. I could have actually done it all the way to the top and it would have broken down faster. But I've made one half the size. This is a good enough start. I've added water just to give it enough moisture to kickstart that process. And I've also covered it with cardboard. And what the cardboard does is that it helps to reduce the amount of rain getting inside, although it doesn't stop it completely, obviously. And it also helps to stop weed seeds from blowing in. You can use plastic, as I've done over here on this pile on the top. You can use landscaping fabric, another material, it's fine. You can also line the insides of your bays, and I tend to do that, but I've not done it this time. And I use a breathable fabric, cornstarch-based landscaping fabric, and that lets air in. It's important that your pile has air, that it has just the right amount of moisture, so moist, not wet, and it will start breaking down. We'll come back to this pile and have a look at it in the next video. And I imagine it will have probably sunk down by about half, maybe a little bit less than that. Composting is not difficult. Just layer stuff as you have it. Just get to know the browns and the greens and put it in a pile. It will heat up. The amount of time that it takes to heat up, to break down, depends on how you're managing the compost pile, if you're turning it, so taking the material and turning it into another bay, the time of the year. Right now it's early September, there's a bit of warmth left, so this pile will warm up and heat up and start breaking down. But if you say make a compost pile in a month's time or November, December, it will take longer than this one to become finished compost. If you've got any questions about making compost, leave me a comment down below. I will try to answer them. And if you want to learn how to make my setup, this composting area, you can watch that video next. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back in a couple of weeks and we'll be looking at some autumn garden jobs and a look at the garden. I'll see you then.